I never thought that a car accident would change my life forever. I mean, we all know that accidents happen, but we never believed that it would be us until it happened. My name is Lily Allen. I'm 29 years old, and I'm an ordinary person. I work too much, sleep too little, and live trying to balance life between bills, meetings, and a routine that seems endless. That night, I was exhausted after yet another stifling day at the office. The traffic was relatively calm, but my mind was in disarray. I was thinking about what I had to do the next day, about the mounting bills, about the exhaustion that seemed never-ending. The traffic light on Pine Street turned yellow, and for a moment I hesitated. Accelerate or brake? I should have stopped. But the decision came too late. The light was already red when another car sped through. The impact was brutal. My body was thrown against the seatbelt. My head hit the glass hard. I heard the deafening sound of metal twisting, glass shattering, and then silence. An absolute silence. That's when I realized something was wrong. Very wrong. I didn't feel any pain. I didn't feel anything, really. My first thought was, did I faint? But when I tried to move, I realized I was no longer inside the car. In fact, I wasn't in any place I could recognize. It was as if I were suspended in the air. But at the same time, everything around me seemed to dissolve into an indescribable void. Then, something even more frightening happened. I saw my own body. There in the wrecked car, trapped among the debris, unmoving. Panic took hold of me. This can't be happening, I thought, but it was. I was dead. I couldn't take my eyes off it. My body lay there, motionless, pale, with blood trickling from my forehead. The windshield had shattered, and sharp pieces were embedded in my skin. It was a horrible sight, but what scared me most was the complete disconnect from it. I knew that that was my body, but I no longer felt like it was part of me. It was like looking at a strange object, something that no longer belonged to me. Then, a distant sound began to form around me. Sirens, cries, people running. I could see them, but I couldn't hear clearly, as if the sound were muffled, like when you're underwater. I tried to scream, tried to move, but it was useless. That's when I felt a force pulling me. It wasn't something physical. It wasn't like hands grabbing me, but a kind of invisible current dragging me upward. My heart, or what was left of it, raced. I was rising, faster and faster, leaving behind the chaos of the accident. The city lights began to distort, blending into a blur of colors, and soon everything was replaced by a deep darkness. But this darkness wasn't frightening. On the contrary, it was serene, almost welcoming. I felt that I was being taken somewhere, but where? Suddenly, a point of light appeared before me. Small at first, but growing quickly, as if it had a life of its own. It was a pulsating, vibrant light, something I had never seen before. It wasn't just brightness, it was presence. I didn't see a path, but I knew I had to move toward it. Something inside me said that this light held the answers. As I approached the light, an indescribable sensation overwhelmed me. It wasn't just warmth or peace, it was something deeper, as if every part of my being was being enveloped by a living, conscious energy. I had never felt anything so intense before, as if that light somehow knew me, as if I were returning to a place that had always been mine, but that I had forgotten. The darkness around me began to disappear, giving way to a space that was impossible to describe in common words. It wasn't a tunnel, it wasn't heaven, as depicted in religious paintings, but a field of pure existence. I saw no walls or limits, just that pulsating light growing before me. And then, without warning, I felt something different, a presence. In the next instant, I realized I wasn't alone. Something, or someone, was there with me. My first instinct was fear, but that quickly dissipated. The presence was strong, overwhelming, yet at the same time it radiated an incomparable peace. That's when my eyes, if I still had eyes, distinguished a shape at the center of that light. It was a human figure, but unlike any I had ever seen. It wasn't just appearance, It was what emanated from it. Love, truth, power. All of that hit me at once, and before I could question anything, I understood exactly who was before me. I didn't need to ask. I just knew. It was Jesus. I wasn't an extremely religious person. I believed in God, of course, but I wasn't the type of person who went to church every Sunday or spent much time thinking about the afterlife. But there, in that moment, any doubt or hesitation I might have had simply ceased to exist. The presence before me wasn't an illusion, nor a product of my mind trying to cling to something familiar. It was real, more real than anything I had ever experienced in my earthly life. When Jesus looked at me, it wasn't just a glance. It was as if my entire existence were being read in a single instant. There was no judgment, no condemnation, only a profound knowledge of who I was, what I had done, and what I still didn't understand about myself. I wanted to speak, to ask, to understand. But before I could form any coherent thought, a voice took over everything around me. It wasn't a common sound, one that you hear with your ears. It was something that resonated within me, in every cell of my being. "You need to see," was all I heard. And suddenly, the light around me began to transform, as if I were being pulled into something greater. A flow of images, memories, and sensations invaded my consciousness. It was like watching a story that had always existed, but that I had never been able to see. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. The images were vivid, as if I were there, but at the same time, I knew they weren't. My memories. I saw people I had never known, places I had never set foot, times long before my birth. They were ancient villages, full of life, illuminated by bonfires dancing to the sound of drums. Men and women gathered in a circle, their voices rising in chants that seemed to touch something beyond the physical world. I could feel the energy of those people, as if the very earth and sky responded to what they did. But it wasn't just music or dance. It was power, a real, vibrant power that flowed through them like an invisible current. Then I understood. This wasn't just a vision of the past. It was a revelation. Jesus was showing me something that had been forgotten, erased, buried by history. Those men and women were healers, spiritual leaders, prophets. They had a deep connection with something I couldn't name, but that was as real as the ground I used to walk on. I saw hands being raised, and with a simple touch, wounds being healed. I saw eyes closed in prayer, and when they opened, they carried a golden glow as if they could see beyond time. And then I saw the rupture. I saw the moment when everything changed. What came next was brutal. I saw villages being invaded, screams cutting through the air, chains tightening around wrists that once lifted prayers to the sky. The very earth that sustained them now saw them being dragged away, loaded onto dark, damp ships without air. What was once strength became subjugation. But what struck me most wasn't just the physical pain or the separation of families. It was what they tried to tear away from them spiritually. I saw sacred symbols being burned, drums silenced, traditions whispered in secret because speaking them meant punishment. I saw a deliberate effort to sever the connection with the divine, to break a bond that until that moment had been unbreakable. Yet then, amid it all, I saw something that knotted my throat. Even in the darkness of the slave quarters, even among the screams of despair in the cotton fields, that flame never went out. I saw calloused hands joining in prayer when no one was watching. I heard songs being chanted at night, hidden in the shadows, carrying messages that went beyond hope. They were calls for spiritual resistance. Even when they tried to take everything away, something remained, something survived. And now Jesus was showing me that this strength, this gift, had never truly disappeared. It had only fallen asleep, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The vision shifted again, and this time I saw the present. I saw busy streets, huge cities, different faces, but the same energy vibrating in some people. I saw young people feeling a calling without fully understanding what it was about, seeking answers in places that couldn't provide them. I saw pastors, community leaders, artists, writers, all carrying fragments of this truth without knowing how to connect them. But I also saw distractions. I saw a world that seemed designed to keep this force asleep. The media feeding lies, culture being distorted, faith being commercialized. I saw divisions being created where there should be unity. I saw people being convinced to forget who they truly were. That's when I understood the real reason why Jesus was showing me all of this. He wanted me to know that the time for awakening had arrived, that this force was beginning to move again, and that those who carried it were about to remember. But I also saw something else, a shadow. Something moving at the edge of my vision, trying to hold back this awakening. Forces that weren't merely human, but that infiltrated the world through systems, manipulated beliefs, fear, and misinformation. I felt a shiver. This battle wasn't just about reclaiming what was lost. It was about preventing it from being erased forever. My heart, or what was left of it in that state, pounded with a mix of urgency and understanding. I didn't know how, but I felt that this revelation wasn't just something I was witnessing. Somehow, I was part of it. We all were. Jesus' voice resonated within me again, unhurried, yet laden with an impossible weight to ignore. The time has come. Those words vibrated through my being in a way I could never adequately describe. It wasn't a mere warning, it was a summons. I understood without needing any explanation. What I had just seen wasn't just a story. It was a reality that was about to unfold, and the world wasn't ready for it. I wanted to ask what I should do, how to carry this truth back into my body, how to tell such a story without being ignored or ridiculed. But before I could react, I was pulled back with an indescribable force. It wasn't like before, when I had ascended gently toward the light. Now, it was as if I were being sucked back into my body, out of control. The vision shattered, the light distorted, and I felt an impact so strong that, for a second, everything went dark. The first thing I felt was pain, an absurd pain, as if my entire body had been crushed and then reassembled haphazardly. My lungs burned as I struggled to draw breath, and my head throbbed as if it were being pressed by something invisible. I heard voices, machines beeping, hurried footsteps around me. My eyes opened, and the cold light of the hospital blinded me for a moment. I was back, my heart racing, my skin sweaty, my whole body trembling. The doctors looked dazed, as if they hadn't expected to see me wake up. And then I heard one of them say, 7 minutes and 46 seconds. She was dead. Those words hit me like a punch. I knew I had been somewhere else. I knew that what I had seen wasn't a dream or a hallucination. But how would I explain that to anyone? Who would believe me? I could barely believe it myself, and yet I had lived it. My fingers dug into the hospital sheets while flashes of the experience still pulsed in my mind. The light, the voice, the visions, Jesus, the calling, all of it was still within me, and somehow I knew that I would never be able to go on with my life as if nothing had happened. I stayed hospitalized for a few more days, but something inside me no longer belonged to that place. The doctors talked about my recovery as if it were a miracle. They said that statistically I shouldn't have come back, much less without severe sequelae. But I knew that my body wasn't the only thing that had changed. My outlook on the world was different. People passed by my hospital room, and I saw them in a different light, as if I could feel the weight they carried, even when they tried to hide it. It was as if a new layer of reality had unfolded before me, and now I saw things as they really were. All the time, one question hammered in my mind. What do I do with this now? Returning to normal life seemed impossible. How could I simply ignore everything I had seen? How could I pretend that those truths weren't burning inside me? But there was also fear. What would happen if I started to speak? How would people react? Would they call me crazy? I myself would have doubted my own story if I hadn't experienced it. But then, on the second night in the hospital, while I was trying to sleep, a familiar sensation enveloped me. It wasn't a vision, it wasn't a voice, but an absolute certainty that took hold of me. I couldn't keep this to myself. I was brought back for a reason. When I was finally discharged, everything seemed different. The world around me hadn't changed, but I had. The streets, the people, the sound of horns and casual conversations. Everything seemed to carry a meaning that I had previously ignored. But along with this new perception came an enormous weight. I knew I had a mission, but I had no idea how to fulfill it. I spent days trying to return to routine, but it was useless. My old job felt empty. My previous concerns made no sense anymore. I tried to ignore that sensation, but it was like a flame burning inside me, impossible to extinguish. I began to research near-death experiences, trying to find something that resembled what I had lived through. I read accounts of people who saw tunnels of light, who felt peace, who encountered loved ones. But nothing I found compared to what Jesus showed me. And then on a lonely night, I gathered the courage and started writing. At first, they were just disjointed words, failed attempts to translate something that seemed greater than any human language. But as I wrote, I realized that my experience wasn't just about me. It was about a greater calling, something that needed to be heard, understood, and above all, remembered. Days went by, but that sense of urgency only grew stronger. I tried to ignore it, to pretend I could go back to being the same person as before, but it was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, flashes of the images Jesus showed me came back. I saw the villages, the rituals, the chains, the ships, the screams, and along with those visions came the certainty that all of this was still happening, just in a different way. The oppression never completely disappeared. It only changed its face. The control was now subtle, masked, but still present. And those who carried the gift, those who had within them that divine connection, were still being prevented from awakening. That's when I realized that more than sharing my experience, I needed to find those people, because they existed. I knew they existed. They were the ones who felt that something was wrong with the world, who sought answers and never found them completely, those who carried a flame within them but didn't know how to nurture it. Jesus showed me that the time for awakening had come, but if this truth wasn't spoken, if no one was ready to receive it, everything could be smothered before it even began. I had come back for a reason, and now I needed to understand how to fulfill that mission. I began to talk about what had happened to me, but it wasn't easy. The first people I told reacted, exactly as I feared, with disbelief. Some thought I had imagined everything because of the trauma from the accident. Others tried to rationalize, saying that near-death experiences were just hallucinations of the brain. But I knew the truth. I was there. I saw. I heard. This wasn't a fantasy, it wasn't a passing delirium, but how could I prove it? How could I convince someone that Jesus had shown me a hidden secret from centuries ago, something that could change the destiny of humanity? That's when I realized I didn't need to convince anyone. The truth didn't need proof, it just needed to be spoken, and those who were ready to listen would. That's how I began sharing my story in online communities, anonymous forums, small groups of people who already felt that something was changing in the world. To my surprise, some believed me. Some people told me that they also felt that calling, that restlessness, that sense that something big was about to happen. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. The awakening had already begun, and I had only touched the surface. Over time, responses began to come in unexpected ways. People I had never seen before sent me messages telling me that they too had strange dreams, visions, feelings they couldn't explain. Some spoke about experiences that resembled mine, spiritual encounters that changed their perception of reality. The more I listened, the more I understood. What Jesus showed me wasn't just a distant possibility. It was already happening. Small signs were everywhere, and those with eyes to see were beginning to notice. But at the same time, I felt that something was trying to prevent this. It was in those moments that fear began to emerge. Some people reacted with hostility to my story, accusing me of making everything up. Others, in even subtler ways, tried to make me doubt myself. I felt a strange resistance, as if an invisible force were trying to silence me. It wasn't just the natural disbelief of people. It was something deeper, something I felt in moments of silence when my mind was vulnerable. It was as if something were trying to make me forget, trying to pull me back into the apathy of the world before the accident. But I couldn't allow that. I couldn't go back. That's when I began to notice the patterns. Every time I spoke about what I saw, about the awakening, about the truth that Jesus showed me, something happened. It was small things at first. Unexpected difficulties, people drifting away, even technical problems that seemed like coincidences. But then the attacks became more direct. Strange dreams, a feeling of weight on my chest when I tried to sleep. A voice whispering in my mind that all of it was nonsense. But I knew exactly what was happening. Jesus had warned me. The forces trying to keep this truth hidden were moving, and I had become a target. I was never the type of person who believed in spiritual battles, but now I had no more doubts. The resistance I felt wasn't just psychological, wasn't just the burden of carrying such a huge story. It was something real, something that tried at all costs to make me give up. But every time fear tried to take hold of me, I remembered Jesus' gaze, the certainty he instilled in me. I wasn't brought back to be silenced. I was brought back to speak, to remind those who had forgotten who they truly are. With each passing day, my conviction only grew stronger. I couldn't hide. I couldn't pretend that nothing had happened. Began to seek deeper answers, to connect with people who also felt that calling. I found spiritual leaders who spoke about what I had seen without even knowing about my experience. I discovered that throughout the centuries, this knowledge had never completely disappeared. It survived in songs, in prayers, in stories passed down from generation to generation. What Jesus showed me wasn't a secret just for me. It was a truth that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered. But along with that discovery came a new understanding. This wasn't just a personal mission. It wasn't just about me telling a story. It was about preparing those who were already feeling that calling, helping them see what had always been within them. The battle wasn't physical. It wasn't about fighting a visible enemy. It was a war for consciousness, for truth, for awakening. And the only weapon we had was knowledge and faith. Jesus showed me that the time had come, but it was up to each one to choose whether to listen or remain asleep. Understanding that changed everything for me. I realized that I didn't need to convince anyone, didn't need to argue or prove anything. My mission was simply to tell what I had seen, to share what I had learned, and to let those who were ready find their way. Awakening couldn't be forced. It had to come from within. That's how I began to connect with more people, to find those who felt the same restlessness as I did. Some had been on the path for a long time. Others were just beginning to notice, but there was something they all shared, a deep sense that something was about to happen. And the more I spoke, the more I realized that this silent revolution was already underway. Young people who had never been interested in spirituality were now seeking answers. People who once felt lost were beginning to reconnect with their roots, with their history, with a calling they couldn't ignore. I saw the awakening happening before my very eyes, and that gave me the strength to continue. But I also knew that the resistance wouldn't end there. The forces that had tried to erase this truth for centuries wouldn't give up so easily. And perhaps that was the real battle, to keep the faith even in the face of doubt, fear, and the constant attempt to silence those who were beginning to remember. I know that many people will never believe what I'm telling. Some will say it was just a delusion, that my brain invented it all to cope with the near-death experience. Others will think it's madness, that I'm just seeking attention. I've accepted that. But for those who feel something different, who know deep down that there is something greater happening, I say, listen to that feeling. There is something awakening in the world, something that they tried to erase for centuries, but that never truly died. This force, this connection with the divine, is still alive, waiting to be recognized again. Since that day, my life has never been the same. I can't simply ignore what I saw, nor pretend that none of it matters. But the greatest change wasn't in what I do. It was in how I see the world. Everything around me carries a different meaning now. I see patterns that once went unnoticed. I perceive things I had never noticed before. And more than that, I feel that I'm only at the beginning of something much greater. Because what Jesus showed me wasn't just a warning, it was a calling. And those who are ready to listen will listen. I don't know exactly what comes next. I don't know how this truth will spread, nor how many people are truly ready to receive it. But I know I'm not alone. Since I began speaking about it, I've met other people who felt the same thing, who had experiences that made them question everything they were taught. People who, in some way, always knew there was something more but couldn't put it into words. Now, those words exist, and the choice is in each person's hands. Ignore